Good morning. And welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Desert. I'm Betty Bender, your worship associate this morning. You're all looking good. How are you? Somebody asked me this morning how I was, and I said, if I was any better, there'd have to be two of me. That's pretty good, huh? Okay. As we begin, we acknowledge that we are on the historic homelands of the various bands of Cahuilla people, and we honor the unique relationship that we hope emerges between our community and the indigenous people and their traditional territories. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Cahuilla people, whose lands and water we benefit from today. Also, before we begin, we want you to know that it doesn't matter where you or your ancestors are from, who you love, your gender identity, your theology, your politics, your immigration status, how tall you are. We welcome all those who are committed to our core values as expressed in our 7 principles. Together, we come to this place to share our hopes, our dreams, and visions. We seek to build a diverse and inclusive community that honors our first principle, and that principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. So thank you for being with us this morning. Please consider making a donation with our virtual offering basket. Your contribution is an important way to support UUCOD. Those of you who are watching via the internet can just click on the link provided in our weekly Constant Contact order of worship you received on Friday, or at the end of the service today through the email link you will receive. If you'd like to be on our email list, you can learn more about us and our programming. You can contact us at admin@uucod.org. And also, I just had to remind myself a minute ago, and I did this, so please, if you haven't already silenced your cell phones, please do that. Please do that now. And now, we'll ring our Tibetan bowl to begin our service, and then listen to our music for centering.
Thank you, Joel. I love that song. It's a song of possibility and hope, and I think what a glorious thing for us to have today, this beautiful day. Thank you. My iPad is misbehaving. Good morning. I'm the Reverend Ian Riddell, and I have the honor of serving this congregation as its minister. However you found us, however many times you've been here with us in person or online, welcome. Come, come, whoever you are, the song goes. Do you hear that voice calling us, calling you? That voice which calls us together here today in this room made holy by our presence and by the sacred breath we share in our singing and our speaking and our silence. That voice which calls us to remember that we are not alone and that we are inextricably linked to all of life, woven into a vast tapestry of existence of which we are a powerful, integral, and holy part. And just as we are called together today, we act as the voice, the heart, the hands of another call, the call to walk with the wanderers, to sing and dance with the worshipers, to proclaim the memory of those who have taken their leave, to wrap the despairing and the broken in the arms of love and community, and hold the hands of all of us who have broken our vows, and call us back again and again and again to the covenant and the work of justice, humility, and steadfast faithfulness. For this we are together today. So, my friends, come, yet again, come, let us worship together.
Now, if you will join me in reading our chalice lighting in unison aspiration. May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament, and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and to help one another in fellowship, this is our aspiration.
Now I'll invite Thera to come forward and light our candles as we speak together our BIPOC candle lighting. We light these candles in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color as they journey on toward spiritual wholeness. May we, as a beloved community, work to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression. May we live out our principles so that justice, dignity, and equity for all prevail. Will you breathe with me and let it go? Felt a little frantic this morning, not in a bad way, but I'm glad you're all here, and I'm glad we're here. I'll speak in the microphone together. We're going to take a moment now for a joyful thing, to honor a passage in the lives of some of this community's members. It's been a while since we did this, thanks to the pandemic, but today we want to honor and celebrate the fact that 3 of our young adults have finished with high school and are imagining what the next steps on their journeys will be. Sarah Moon Pacino, Rain Anthony Pacino, and Maddox Phillips are all here with us today. This community has watched you grow, companioned you as you journeyed through childhood, perhaps, and adolescence, cared for you, challenged you, perhaps shushed you on 1 or 2 occasions. Apologies for that in hindsight. We hope we have inspired and taught you. And I know from talking to the older folks in this congregation that you have taught and inspired all of us. We've learned from you as we witnessed you meet challenges and triumphs, setbacks and successes, as you've grown into yourselves more fully and more deeply. And so we're taking some time today to say congratulations and we love you, and to let you know that wherever your life's journey takes you, that our love and our hope will go with you. After the service today, we can all take a moment to greet and congratulate Thera and Rain and Maddox outside at the tables set up on the patio. You'll see fancy balloons and lots of great things. I have a small gift for you from the congregation in a moment, and we have some words that we'd like to say together. So I'm going to do that thing that probably a lot of us dislike, but I'm going to ask you to come forward and stand at the front and face the congregation. And AV folks, we're going to move on to our litany. So we are going to speak some words. I will be the leader. You will be the congregation, and our seniors will speak their words. So if we're ready for that. Today we honor the youth among us, you who are stepping beyond and away and toward. Today we share in your journey and encourage your discovery. Today we welcome your energy and offer you a safe place to grow. Today we celebrate your hopes and dreams. Come live, breathe, thrive, and rejoice. Your time is now. Today we applaud you for all you have been, for all you are now, for all you will be.
Today marks an ending so that I may begin again, to hope and do and learn and be.
Today you cross a bridge. Go now and explore with wonder. We will support and nurture you. You are the future. Today you cross a bridge. Go now and make choices that make you happy. We will support and nurture you. You are amazing. Today you cross a bridge. Be hopeful and patient. We will support and nurture you. You are an inspiration.
Today I cross a bridge and join in fellowship. Let me grow, but don't let me go.
Together we share a special place. Together we learn. Together we love.
Together we grow.
I can't read my own handwriting. These are some small tokens of appreciation. There's an oblong-shaped envelope in there. I don't know what's in that. But there's also a small little jar with some candles, a little travel chalice for you, a blank sketchbook for you to imagine and ponder and wonder and reflect for yourself, and a book of Unitarian Universalist readings that we hope will carry with you and help you on your journey. So, and I know that there are more things out on your tables. So, some small gifts for a large journey. So, Thera Moon Pacino, Rain Anthony Pacino, Maddox Phillips. As you step forward into your next chapter, we send you out with our fondest hopes and blessings. May life bring enough challenge to fuel your dreams, enough affirmation to honor your gifts, and enough nurture to bring your spirit's peace. Believe in your vision, follow your dreams, and know always that when you return to us, here you will find the hands of friends. Congratulations.
Today's reflection is called The Monophobic Response, and it's by Octavia Butler. I'm reading what she wrote. For all but the first 10 years of my life, writing has been my way of journeying from incomprehension, confusion, and emotional upheaval to some sort of order, or at least to an orderly list of questions and considerations. For example, at the moment, there are no true aliens in our lives. No Martians, Tau Cetians to swoop down in advanced spaceships, their attentions firmly fixed on the all-important us. No gods, no devils, no spirits, no angels, no gnomes. Some of us know this. Deep within ourselves, we know it. We're on our own. The focus of no interest except our consuming interest in ourselves. Is this too much reality? It is, yes. No one's watching, caring, extending a hand, or taking a little demonic blame. If we are adults and past the age of having our parents come running when we cry, our only help is ourselves and one another. Yes, this is far too much reality. No wonder we need aliens. No wonder we're so good at creating aliens. No wonder we so often project alienness onto one another. This last, of course, has been the worst of our problems. The human alien from another culture, country, gender, race, ethnicity. This is the tangible alien who can be hurt or killed. There's a vast and terrible sibling rivalry going on within the human family as we satisfy our desires for territory, for dominance, and exclusivity. How strange. In our ongoing eagerness to create aliens, we express our need for them, and we express our deep fear of being alone in a universe that cares no more for us than it does for stones or suns or any other fragments of itself. And yet we are unable to get along with those aliens who are closest to us, those aliens who are, of course, ourselves. All the more need, then, to create more cooperative aliens, supernatural beings or intelligences from the stars. Sometimes we just need someone to talk to, someone we can trust to listen and care, someone who knows us as we really are and as we rarely get to know one another, someone whose whole agenda is us. Like children, we do still need great and powerful parents, and we need invisible friends. What is adult behavior, after all, but more sophisticated, more thoughtful, disguised, excused childhood behavior? The more educated, the more sophisticated we are, the more able we are to conceal the child within us. No matter. The child persists, and it's lonely. Perhaps someday we'll have truly alien company. Perhaps we will eventually communicate with other life elsewhere in the universe, or at least become aware of other life, distant but real, existing with or without our belief, with or without our permission. How will we be able to endure such a slight? The universe has other children. There they are, distant siblings that we've longed for. What will we feel? Hostility? Terror? Suspicion? Relief? No doubt. New siblings to rival. Perhaps for a moment, only a moment, this affront will bring us together. All human, all much more alike than different, all much more alike than is good for our prickly pride. Humanity, a pluribus unum, at last. A oneness focused on and fertilized by certain knowledge of alien others. What will be born of that brief, strange, and ironic union?
I'll invite the ushers to come forward now, and we will take our offering. Thank you, Joel, and thank you to all of you for your generosity, which allows this congregation to imagine its future, to ponder how to live together, and to make that a reality through the work of our hands, our hearts, and our spirits. Thank you for your generosity. And these are the joys and sorrows of this community on this beautiful day in May. Bryna says, joy is having Carol Scanney's neck pillows when one really needs them. What a comfort they have been these past few weeks. Bless you, Carol. Thank you. And Mac lights a candle for the spirit of his late husband and at his first birthday of his departure yesterday, Greg Solt. You are loved, writes Mac, and you are loved here, Mac. And there are joys and sorrows that remain in the quiet of our hearts, the departure of dear loved ones, the arrival of new loved ones, the turn of the year on events of our lives, the work and the way of the world around us. The world is full of war as it is of joy, a world as full of fear as it is of hope. So we hold all of these. We hold them in our hearts that we may feel with each other. We hold them in our minds that we may remember and take note of the ways that the world needs us to be. We hold them in our spirits with hope for inspiration, hope for challenge, and the sure knowledge of our connection to each other, to all of life. And we hold them. We hold all of these things in our bodies, in our aches, in our tiredness, in our energy, in our anxiety. We hold all of this in our bodies, as well as our minds and our hearts and our spirits. And so we pause in stillness and quiet for a moment, breathing deeply, breathing deeply, breathing deeply of the sacred breath that we share with each other and with all of life. We pause, hold ourselves, hold our neighbors and our antagonists, and all that we love and hope for, in deep and profound loving kindness, as we breathe into the quiet of this space. May all beings know peace. May all beings know an end to suffering. May all beings know love. Will you remain in your seats now and join us together in singing our hymns for meditation, Spirit of Life and Fuente de Amor.
Oh
voices bring great solace and joy. I was in San Diego yesterday for a memorial service for an acquaintance and a friend, a dear friend of some of my dear friends. And so traveled there, and before the service and after the service was talking with many friends and had several conversations about the idea that they didn't think that they would be able to go back to living life the way they did before the pandemic. In fact, they weren't sure they could go back to being who they were before the pandemic. They had been changed in some deep and unknown ways, and that they were uncertain of what they and their life might become in this after time. I imagine some of you have been feeling the same way, and I don't think it's true just for individuals. We read and watch the news, explicitly racist and white supremacist terrorism in our neighborhoods, media fostering and promoting conspiracy theories about replacement that used to only come from the mouths of fringe protesters, explicit attacks on women's bodily integrity and control, attacks on the very roots of our democratic process. What we know now has always been there. Unfortunately, is now given permission to thrive in the light of day by politicians and media who stoke our basest instincts, and by social media platforms that amplify outrage and anxiety. You walk into the library these days or browse on a bookstore in person or online, it might seem like what was once shelved in the science fiction section, mostly the dystopian science fiction section, needs to be moved to current affairs. It feels like we've started living in Orwell's 1984, or Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, or Margaret Atwood's A Handmaid's Tale, or Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. There's always been part of the science fiction world that has tried to give us glimpses, warnings of what might happen, what might be if we let some of our fears and anxieties control us and our decisions and our technology. And so, if we are warned, we have been warned about the road it seems we're traveling these days, how do we then avoid those futures? How do we keep ourselves safe from demagoguery and totalitarianism in the heart and in society? Should we be fighting to get back to where we were before the pandemic struck? Well, like my friends who wondered if going back was desirable or even possible, I wonder if the answer, or one of the answers, is instead imagining new ways. While we were discussing the eighth principle here in our congregation, which you can now find on the back of your order of service, by the way, people often asked what our congregation would look like when we adopted the principle and began to live it. My response was then, and is now, a little evasive, actually, but true. We will imagine and figure it out, make it real together. That's what our work is to figure and imagine it out together. There's no set way to live it out, that we'll have to do the work together of making it real, and that what we will imagine here might be different from what another congregation or community might imagine, because we are a different gathering of people. And I think that's one thing we need to be doing in general these days, not just getting back to the way things were, because often for so many of us, the marginalized, the abused, the neglected, those living outside of conformity, the back to then just wasn't great. Things were not great. And those things led us here, honestly. We need to be imagining new possibilities, new ways of thinking. This is not new for me to say this to you. I realize that last July, I said to you in a sermon focused on Doctor Who and science fiction, I said, when we tell stories of new worlds, new possibilities, we open space in our hearts and in our worlds for new possibilities as well. I quoted then, and I will again, from author and activist Adrian Marie Brown, who said that in order to create a world that works for more people, for more life, we have to collaborate on the process of dreaming and visioning and implementing that world, end quote. Now, Adrian Marie Brown grounded her understanding and commitments in her reading of science fiction. In a recent interview about the impact and meaning of Ursula Le Guin's work in her life and her work, Brown reasserted that we need new imaginings in order to figure out how to survive and thrive together. She said, somebody had to imagine white supremacy, and that our work was to imagine a new story that could help us build a new and different world. For her, this work, this imagining, is a science fictional act, a science fictional practice, growing for her from the writing and life of Octavia Butler and Ursula Le Guin, and popping up and thriving in other places. So let's spend some time, actually more time. I realize I often go back to Octavia Butler and Ursula Le Guin, and I do not apologize for that. Let's spend some time with Octavia and Ursula, and in between, some other voice. Thank you, Betty, for sharing Octavia Butler's words today. The reading was a little long, and I went to sort of start editing down, and I'm like, no, we'll just hear what Octavia had to say, so thank you for that. Octavia Butler decided she would be a science fiction author at a time when most people had only heard or knew one African-American science fiction author, Samuel R. Delany. Black people at the time just weren't seen as creators of science fiction or even as possible characters in science fiction or honestly as the audience for science fiction. There were aliens from other places and other times, but not a lot of black characters or characters of other races. One of the reasons that the original Star Trek series was so revolutionary. In confusion and not a little bit of anger, she wrote, science fiction reaches into the future, the past, the human mind. It reaches out to other worlds and into other dimensions. Is it really so limited, then, that it cannot reach into the lives of ordinary, everyday humans who happen to not be white? And then she set about doing that reaching beyond those limits, writing her stories, imagining worlds and versions of our world where those who, quote, happen to not be white lived and struggled with the world, and she inspired generations of others to follow her. Now, because at the time of the dearth of representation in the genre, it seems she was often asked, well, what good is science fiction to black readers? It's all white men flying rocket ships. What good is science fiction thinking? What good is science fiction's thinking about the present, the future, and the past, she wrote? What good is its tendency to warn or consider alternative ways of thinking and doing? What good is its examination of the possible effects of science and technology, of social organization and political direction? And she answered, at its best, science fiction stimulates imagination and creativity. It gets reader and writer off the beaten track, off the narrow footpath of what everyone is saying, doing, thinking, whoever everyone happens to be this year. This is the invitation that Butler and science fiction are holding out to us now in our day, to get off the beaten track and imagine something new. Now, the worlds of science fiction and fantasy writing are vastly different now than they were when Butler was writing those words, different than they were even 10 or 15 years ago. Those writing and crafting science fiction and fantasy are an ever more diverse and varied bunch of people, partly because Octavia Butler wrote those words and asked those questions. And one of the reasons this diversity is important and meaningful for us is that when we imagine our futures, we often do so without seeing or understanding the ways that imagining might be grounded in cultural assumptions. If we grow up in a culture, like many of us have, that sometimes unthinkingly equates goodness with growth, then that is going to have an impact on the kind of futures we imagine as successful, or what we think thriving is, or what questions we might ask of a situation. If we come from a culture that sees heroism through the lens of individualism, then that is going to have an impact on the stories we tell about heroes, how we imagine their triumphs and what winning looks like, and who those heroes are. If we come from a culture that values innovation over tradition, then that will have an impact on how we write and read stories of people leaving home behind. If we come from a culture that has a grounding myth of a cosmic struggle between absolute good and absolute evil, that will have an impact on the stories we tell and how we imagine any ground between those two. So it really does matter that much of the newer variety of writers and producers in the science fiction and fantasy worlds come from non-white, non-European, non-American cultures. Author Agner Lauren Wilson writes, "When we as black authors," she's African American, "grapple with our own blackness and roots, whether in the diaspora or in dialogue with Africa, we are taking control of our own futures, stories, and histories. By doing this, new technologies and ways of being emerge, giving insight to the readers about how to interact with their own communities." Author Nedi Okorafor is a Nigerian-American author of science fiction and fantasy. Through her novels and short stories, she explores the what-if of science fiction grounded not in American or even in African-American cultural understandings, but in explicitly African culture and understandings, and explicitly West African. What new technologies and possibilities might grow out of the cultural roots of Nigeria? She asked, rather than Wales or Greece or Illinois. Two of her trilogies have caught me lately. A trilogy of novellas, shorter novels, beginning with the first one is called Binti, B-I-N-T-I, tell the story of a young African woman named Binti, who was the first of her Himba people to attend an intergalactic university. She's not going there from Paris. She's not going there from New York or Athens or even Rio de Janeiro. She's going there from West Africa. The tales explore her relationship to her traditions and the land of her people, and how those help her make meaning of the alien cultures and experiences she encounters, and how these experiences and encounters make going home again very difficult for her. These stories are not grounded in the tropes of individualism and colonialism as many other science fiction works might be, and they are richer for it and show new possibilities for connection and hope. In the face of change, she struggles to figure out how to care for her hair in outer space, in a culture that has very specific rituals for caring for her hair in very ways that needs the earth of home to do it. How does she do this on another planet? Okorafor's another trilogy of hers fantasy novels called Akata Witch, Akata Warrior, and Akata Woman tell the story of Sunny, a young Nigerian woman who grew up in the United States to Nigerian parents and has moved back to Nigeria with her family. She discovers she is a leopard person, someone granted power and knowledge of magics, and begins to attend a school for young leopard people. But this school looks nothing like Hogwarts and nothing like the wizarding school on LeGuin's Roke Island. Grounded in Nigerian culture and myth and history and methods of teaching and passing on of culture, new possibilities for success and safety, new and old ways of learning, new definitions of winning and community become possible. And the way that the story ends, which I will not give away because I think you should read the books, the way that the story ends does not come because Arthur pulls the sword from the stone or Luke blows up the Death Star. It comes from very different places. Another science fiction and fantasy loves the trilogy. We have J.R.R. Tolkien to thank for that, or blame for that. But there is a trilogy of novels by Canadian First Nations woman named Eden Robinson called the Trickster Trilogy. And this is the story of Jared. He's a First Nations youth living in British Columbia and dealing with the realities of native life in Western Canada. And he's also dealing with learning that he is the child of his mother and the trickster Raven, and all that that means for him and others' expectations of him. Meanings and experiences drawn from indigenous social and spiritual traditions that grow out of an indigenous cosmology, rather than, say, those that come from a cosmology we non-natives might be used to, like, say, the Greek god. Jared's story is very different than Percy Jackson's, the son of the Greek god Poseidon. Even though they seem to look similar at the beginning, they grow from very different experiences. Often when we are discussing fighting against white supremacy in our hearts and in our institutions, we are asked to center different voices and different experiences, to de-center white experiences and voices so that we can see and hear the lives, experiences, ideas, imaginings of others. This is not just because it's somebody else's turn to be at the center, but because other experiences and voices share new groundings for possibility. And what might it look like to examine our own ways of being and wonder what might be different? Our world is not just calling us to change our institutions, to center the experience of others as we craft our institutions and our responses to the challenges of the day. We're being called to examine our hearts and our ways of being. This kind of transformation runs through so many of the stories in science fiction and fantasy literature, but I want to finish by focusing on one author's change and learning as an author, rather than just on the transformations in her character. And you've known me long enough to know now who this author will be. Ursula Le Guin was a master of both science fiction and fantasy, and her first works were being published in the late 1960s, and she continued writing well into the 2000s. She had a very long career. When reflecting on the first three novels set in her Earth-Sea world fantasy, young adult fantasy, which started in 1968, Le Guin was very clear that she had not yet grown into feminism when she was writing them. And despite the powerful difference these books had in many ways from other books written at the time, Le Guin has said that she was writing them as a fake man and not as a woman. They still fit neatly into male-centered quest narratives, still featured male heroes who save the day, still understand female magic and power with suspicion. And so, more than a decade later, she came back and she wrote a fourth novel in the series, and then later a fifth, and a sequence of novellas and short stories. All of these new works showed new perspective, new grounding in Le Guin's own growing Taoism and feminism and anarchistic perspectives. Many readers hated the switch, the move from quest narrative to much more domestic in quotes, writing. They felt like Le Guin had betrayed her own world, that she was rejecting her own world. But Le Guin was very clear that her own growth and grounding had changed over her life, and her created world needed to grow into that change as well. One of Le Guin's most powerful and treasured works is The Left Hand of Darkness. In this novel, she explores an Earth-humans encounter with a planet whose people are ungendered for most of their lives, except for monthly periods when they take on either male or female sexual characteristics in order to have sex and become pregnant and give birth, after which everyone returns to their non-gendered state. Think about that for a moment. That was pretty shocking and profound and progressive in 1969 when the novel was published. I think it still is today, offering us the opportunity to imagine a world separated from our cultural norms around gender and sex and biology. But even in 1969, some critiqued the book from a more progressive position. Le Guin had chosen to use male pronouns, he, him, his, for her non-gendered characters, and wrote the characters in ways that the reader was likely to interpret as male, even when they were stated to be non-gendered. And of course, it's a very binary idea of gender, even when not gendering. Some feminist and progressive commentators and other science fiction writers critiqued Le Guin for this, and she responded at first in a grumpy and defensive way. It's kind of really wonderful to read her responses. Makes me feel a little bit better about myself, because over time, Le Guin came to realize that she could have done things differently. She became willing and able to publicly hear and critique her own writing and characters publicly, and imagine things differently with some grace and humility. We more modern readers see the flaws in The Left Hand of Darkness and Earthsea, and while continuing to offer critique to Le Guin, I want to honor her for her willingness to rethink, her willingness to rewrite, her willingness to reimagine. A more modern critic named Tuesday Smiley honors Le Guin's dynamic practice of radical imagination, she says, and its interweaving with a rigorous process of auto-critique. By daring to dream another world and by being willing to take ownership of the deficiencies within that dream, she writes, Le Guin models a use of radical imagination as a critical tool for envisioning how the hierarchical and social structures of our world can be remade. There is lots of great academic writing about science fiction. Not just Le Guin's writing, but her way of being an author and thinker that offers possibility, taking ownership of the deficiencies within that dream. That sticks with me. So often I fear that we are shown how our way of being, our institutions, the things that we hold dear, even our dreams, have the potential for harm or have actually harmed others, and we react defensively, grumpily, fearfully. We wonder how we can change and still be ourselves, how we can change and see what we have done in the past and still move forward, how we can imagine newness. It is one of the functions of science fiction to help us imagine what it is to be human. If that is so, what it is possible to be as human, then shouldn't we search for that humanity in as broad a spectrum of possibilities as possible? Shouldn't we ground our exploration of what it is to be human in diverse and rich and varied ways so that our imaginings might be brought to life, grounded in fantastic, wonderful, transformative vision? This is the perspective we can find, the perspective that I find in the writings of Butler, of Okorafor, of Robinson, of so many more. And in the lived example of Ursula Le Guin, I see a model of humbly acknowledging that change in ourselves and in how we do things, change is possible if we listen, if we learn, if we grow, if we expand our understanding of ourselves and the possibilities of being human. What new lands, what new hopes, what new possibilities can we imagine? May that imagining guide our lives. And now I'm going to invite you in a moment to rise and sing in body and in spirit. We are going to sing the African American spiritual "Come and Go With Me to That Land," an imagining of possibility in the face of hardship and death. So I invite you to rise in body and spirit. We sing "Come and Go With Me to That Land." The words will be on the screen. We're going to sing this without the piano today. So I'm going to invite you to join me. Joel knew that was coming. He knew that was coming. So I'm going to start singing it. I invite you to join me as you are ready to do so. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom.
There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. They'll be singing in that land. They'll be singing in that land. They'll be singing in that land. They'll be singing in that land where I'm bound. They'll be singing in that land. They'll be singing in that land. They'll be singing in that land where I'm bound. Come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land where I'm bound. Thank you.
That brings back my old folk singing college days from the 1960s. Speaking of 1969, before we are going to extinguish the chalice, but before we do that, I'd like to remind you that today is Red Nose Day, and that we'll be assembling on the patio for pictures. So you put on your red nose and have pictures taken. And there are some extra red noses on the round table in the foyer if you don't have one. Okay, please join me in reciting. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Sometimes looking to the past, to other cultures, to other traditions inspires our vision. The Buddha once said that hatred will never cease by hatred. It will only cease by love. As we have extinguished our chalice, as we prepare to go forth into the world, may our lives be given not to fear, but to hope. Not to hate, but to kindness. Not to indifference, but to love and connection and trust and togetherness. Go in peace, my friends, to imagine, to love, and to serve that world. May it be so.